Hey there, sleepyheads. If you're here right now, maybe it's late, and your mind just needed a softer place to land. Maybe you're lying in bed, scrolling under dim lights, looking for something calm, familiar, maybe even comforting. If so, you're exactly where you should be. Tonight, we're not just talking about SpongeBob. We're going back to a feeling. Quiet mornings, warm blankets, cartoons playing softly in the background. Back when life felt lighter. So take a breath. Let the day fade. Pull your blanket a little closer. And let's begin. There was something steady about Saturday mornings back then. The light came slower, like even the sun was waking up gently. The carpet sometimes felt cold under your feet, and the TV screen had that little static buzz as it warmed up. You didn't think about time. You didn't need to. Breakfast wasn't fancy. It was just whatever cereal felt right that day. You might still remember the way the box opened, that soft crackle of the cardboard. It kind of felt like starting a tiny ritual. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The real magic was in the quiet before the episode began. When the Nickelodeon logo swept across the screen in that bright orange, something in the room shifted. It felt like the world outside paused for a second and gave you permission to just be. No pressure. No expectations. Just comfort, waiting on the other side of a theme song. You could almost hear the fridge humming behind you. Maybe someone else in the house was still asleep, and you had those early minutes all to yourself. There was a peace in that silence. Not empty, just gentle. Like the universe whispering, "Take your time." The smell of cereal and milk mixed with the sound of cartoons. It became a language of its own, a kind most people forget as they grow up. Something about that moment stayed. SpongeBob didn't feel like a character. He felt like someone already awake and happy to see you. It was the kind of energy that made mornings easier, even when school felt big and the week felt long. His laugh didn't rush you. It just welcomed you. You might have felt something like this before, on a day when nothing huge happened, but everything felt okay anyway. But that feeling only grew stronger later. Saturdays became a kind of sanctuary. Even if the week was messy, somehow the weekend always held space for the softer parts of us. And when that first episode started, it felt like stepping into a door only kids knew how to find, somewhere between the cereal aisle and the TV remote. Growing older didn't erase the door. It just made it harder to see. Maybe you never noticed how safe those little moments were. They didn't need to be remembered, and yet they still are. And tonight, under dim lights and quiet air, that same gentle doorway might still exist. Not perfectly, just enough. Sometimes memory doesn't need clarity, only warmth. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. At some point, SpongeBob stopped feeling like a character and started feeling like someone we actually knew. Maybe that sounds silly out loud, but back then, it didn't. The way he moved, the way he tried so hard, it never felt robotic. It felt familiar, almost human in a way that was hard to explain. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What mattered more was why he felt that way. Maybe SpongeBob felt real, because deep down, we needed him to be. There was something steady about his energy. He never seemed tired of life, even when everything went wrong. The Krusty Krab would collapse, Squidward would yell, Jellyfish would chase him across entire fields. And still, He laughed like tomorrow, only held good things. Something about that made it easy to root for him. It was like he represented the part of us that didn't give up, even when we wanted to. Sometimes, when the day felt heavy, his laugh almost felt like a reminder, not in a loud, inspirational way, more like someone quietly nudging your shoulder and saying, "Hey, it's okay to keep trying." The fridge humming softly in the background, a TV glow across the couch, maybe the afternoon light stretching across the room. Those moments had space in them, space where it was easy to believe that optimism still mattered. You might have felt something like this before, watching a show, but somehow feeling seen by it. The world around us kept moving, but SpongeBob stayed the same. Not frozen, just consistent. Reliable. When friends moved away, when school got harder, when weekends stopped feeling long, he was still there flipping patties and waking up too early. Growing up meant change. Watching SpongeBob meant staying connected to something untouched by time. But it didn't end there. Kids laughed with him, but adults started noticing his silence. The way he listened to others more than he talked. How he found joy in little things, like soap bubbles and paper boats. He didn't ask for much, just a good day, and someone to share it with. There was a kind of purity in that, the kind that makes you stop and wonder if life really needs to be as complicated as it feels sometimes. Maybe that's why he stayed with us, because he didn't demand anything. He just existed the same way morning sunlight exists, quietly, consistently, like a presence you don't notice until it's gone. And even now, lying in the dark, it's strange how a cartoon sponge can still feel more human than most people we meet. Not because he spoke, but because he listened, in his own kind of way. Something about that moment stayed. SpongeBob wasn't a teacher. He wasn't a hero. He was more like a friend who never changed, even when everything else did. And that feeling only grew stronger later, when we started realizing that maybe he wasn't just a character at all. Maybe he was a reminder of who we used to be and who we still hope we might become. There were little sounds inside every episode, soft ones, easy to miss unless you were really listening. They weren't loud or flashy. They just lived in the background, almost like they were waiting quietly for someone to notice. The patter of SpongeBob's shoes on the floor, that tiny squeak every time he turned a corner. It kind of felt like footsteps of someone who was never in a hurry. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What mattered more was how those sounds worked together, forming their own rhythm, one that felt safe. The ocean always had this low rumble to it, not aggressive, more like the distant sound of cars outside at night, the kind you barely hear when you're lying in bed with the lights off. It never asked for attention, but it filled the silence in a way that made the quiet feel less lonely. Sometimes the bubbles would make that light, fizzing noise, like soda being poured into a glass on a hot afternoon. It didn't shout. It just breathed. And somehow, that breath became a kind of comfort. You might have heard the fridge humming softly in the kitchen, or the heat clicking through the vents. Sometimes, SpongeBob's laugh echoed in a way that almost felt like it bounced off the walls of your own room. It didn't matter if you were alone watching. It never felt like you were. Something about that stayed, even when the show ended. Even now, if you close your eyes long enough, the sounds can almost play back on their own, like muscle memory, but for feelings. But it didn't end there. Certain sounds became part of who we were. The meow of Gary, the sizzle of the fryer at the Krusty Krab, Squidward's clarinet, always just a little off key, drifting through the air like a lonely signal. You didn't have to understand music to understand the emotion behind it. Without being loud, those sounds created a kind of atmosphere. The same way a lamp glowing in the corner of a room can make it feel lived in. You might have felt something like this before, walking down the hallway of a house you used to live in. Maybe it was empty. Maybe it echoed. But somehow, you still knew exactly where things were. The tiny creak in the floor, the familiar hum of the old bathroom fan. Sometimes, people swear they still know what their childhood home smelled like. Not clearly, but enough. Some memories don't need to be sharp. They just need to be warm. Something about that moment stayed. SpongeBob didn't just speak through words. He spoke through all those tiny sounds that made kids feel safe, without ever realizing why. And as life got louder with age, those quiet little sounds only grew more important. Even now, they remain tucked away somewhere in the back of the mind, like a song you didn't know you remembered until it suddenly starts playing. That safe rhythm never really left. It just waits, still humming, still whispering, ready to return the moment the world outside finally gets quiet again. Maybe Jellyfish Fields was never really about jellyfish. It felt more like a place built out of imagination, a kind of freedom kids have before they realize it's rare. No homework waiting on the desk, no phone buzzing with reminders, no weight pressing down on the morning. Just a net, open air, and the kind of blue sky that looked like it went on forever. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What mattered was how natural it felt to see SpongeBob run through that grass, like nothing bad could ever reach him there. You could almost hear the wind moving across the fields, soft and steady, like someone breathing calmly beside you. SpongeBob never checked the time. He never worried about what came next. In cartoons, there were no deadlines, just moments. Kids didn't realize how lucky that was. Only later, when alarms start appearing on phones and schedules start filling up, does that kind of simplicity feel distant? Not gone, just quieter. Something about that moment stayed. Jellyfish Fields wasn't loud. It was peaceful in a way that didn't need attention. The sound of the grass brushing against SpongeBob's legs, the buzz of jellyfish floating past. It all carried the rhythm of a world without urgency. You might have felt something like this before. Maybe lying on your back in a field, staring at clouds that looked like animals, and places you'd never been. It wasn't exciting, but it was free. But it didn't end there. Those scenes quietly showed what childhood really felt like before we knew to name it. Freedom isn't loud. It's gentle. The kind that drifts through summer light and makes days feel longer than they actually were. Maybe that's why Jellyfish Fields felt safe even without walls. Some places don't need protection. They just need space. As SpongeBob ran with a net, there was no goal, just joy in moving. It wasn't about catching anything. It was about being allowed to wander without explanations. That's something adults rarely get to do. Maybe that's why those scenes lingered, even if we didn't realize it at the time. They showed what life looked like before effort became expected. You can almost picture the sky now, bright, open, endless. No ceiling above you, no fluorescent lights, just sun, breeze, and possibility. Even if it only existed in animation, it felt real enough to believe it in. And sometimes, before falling asleep, you might wonder if there was a moment in your life like that too. One that passed before you knew it would matter. Jellyfish. Fields wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. SpongeBob didn't just visit it. He belonged to it in a way that felt familiar, like how kids blend into their imaginations without needing permission. The field didn't need to explain itself. It simply existed, and that was enough. Maybe it still exists somewhere, not on a map, but inside the quiet parts of the mind, waiting to return when the world slows down just enough to let it in. That feeling only grew stronger later. As the fields faded, something inside began to change too. Most of us didn't notice when childhood ended. It never sent warnings. There was no final episode, no message saying, "This is the last time you'll sit like this, waiting for the show to start." One day, cartoons just stopped being part of the evening. SpongeBob kept airing, but we weren't there to see it. But that wasn't where it ended. What really changed was how quietly it all happened. We traded the TV glow for phone screens, quick scrolling and calendars packed with things to do. The days got louder, but life somehow felt quieter. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, more like a pause that never fully finished. You might have felt it during late-night walks home, when streetlights stuttered through half-closed blinds, and the air felt a little heavier than usual. That feeling doesn't shout. It lingers, waiting to be noticed. Sometimes the fridge hums behind you at night, and for just a moment, you could swear the world still sounds the way it did when you were younger. Maybe that's how memory works. Not clear, but not gone either. Some thoughts don't arrive as sentences. They arrive as feelings. And every now and then, one slips in like a commercial break that never really ended. Something about that moment stayed. Maybe growing up didn't mean losing childhood. It just meant carrying it differently. Less like a place and more like a pulse. A quiet rhythm underneath everything else. SpongeBob kept living in Bikini Bottom, waking up too early, greeting another day like it was brand new. We just stopped waking up with him. But it didn't end there. Memory has a way of coming back when life slows down, on long car rides, in the shower, during sleepless nights. Not sad, not happy, just quiet. The kind of quiet that stays for a few seconds longer than it should. That soft space where everything goes still for a moment, and something inside you says, "You've felt this before." Maybe that's why nostalgia doesn't always feel like looking back. Sometimes it feels like finally catching up to something that waited for you. SpongeBob never grew old, but we did. And maybe that's why he still matters, because he reminds us of the version of ourselves that didn't worry so much about becoming someone. You might have felt it when you turned on the TV after years and heard the theme song again. Familiar but distant, like hearing your name from across a room. Time moves forward, but memory doesn't always follow. It lingers in places we haven't visited in years. Cereal aisles, living room carpets, that specific shade of morning light you only saw during summer break. Growing up without noticing isn't a failure. It's a natural drift. Like waves moving across the ocean floor. Slow, steady, almost invisible. And tonight, as you settle into bed, maybe that quiet part of childhood is still out there. Waiting, patient, unhurried. It isn't trying to return. It's just reminding you it never fully left. Bikini Bottom never really changed. The streets stayed the same. The houses kept their shapes. And the sky above the ocean stayed its calm, pastel blue. That might be why it still feels familiar, like a town that quietly kept our room exactly how we left it, just in case we ever found our way back. But that wasn't the surprising part. What lingered more was the feeling that everything down there has been waiting, almost patient, like time passes differently underwater. Squidward is still practicing his clarinet, probably getting the notes almost right before they slip away. Patrick is still resting on his rock, drifting through thoughts that don't ask for explanations. And SpongeBob, he's probably still waking up too early, turning off his alarm before sunrise, believing the day will welcome him the same way it always has. You might have felt something like that before, when a memory feels so vivid, you could swear it's still happening somewhere. Sometimes at night, when things get quiet and screens finally dim, it almost feels like the ocean remembers us more than we remember it. Not perfectly, but warmly. Like the way a familiar scent brings back a moment before your mind even catches up. Maybe childhood works like that. Maybe some places don't fade. They just stay still until we slow down enough to feel them again. But it didn't end there. The beauty of Bikini Bottom is that it never asked us to stay. It simply offered space, a steady world where the noise of growing up never reached. Even when life started moving faster, tests, responsibilities, long commutes, unanswered texts, the ocean floor stayed steady, as if SpongeBob still stood inside the crusty crab, spatula in hand, ready to wave the moment the door opened. There's a quiet kind of comfort in knowing that. Not a fix, not an answer, just presence. The kind that doesn't demand anything from you. Maybe that's why memories of Bikini Bottom come back when we're tired or anxious, or lying awake staring at the ceiling. Not to pull us backwards, but to remind us of something gentle we used to know, before we learned how to rush. You can almost hear it now if you try. The distant bubbles, the soft rumble of the ocean, the way footsteps echo on the floor of the crusty crab after closing time. It's like the world down there kept its rhythm, even while ours changed. Maybe that rhythm still belongs to us. Some places hold space without asking for anything in return. Bikini Bottom might be one of them. Not a destination, just a memory, breathing quietly somewhere beyond the noise. And tonight, if your thoughts begin to slow, maybe you'll feel it a little. Not as a clear picture, but as a warmth, a familiarity, the kind that whispers, "It's okay. You can rest now." Maybe we don't need to return to childhood. Maybe it's already waiting patiently inside us, still floating, still glowing, like a light underwater that never went out. SpongeBob always woke up excited. The alarm would go off way too early, and somehow he'd already be smiling before the day even started. His shoes squeaked, his laugh bounced off the walls, and everything about him looked ready for another adventure. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What lingered quietly beneath the cheerfulness was how hard he tried, every single day, like someone afraid to disappoint a person we never saw. Maybe excitement can sometimes be a mask. Kids saw him as silly, but adults might feel something different now. The way he rushed to work, the way he stayed optimistic even when things went wrong. It almost felt like he was holding something together, even when no one asked him to. You might have noticed it too, in moments when people laughed at his mistakes, yet he still found a reason to try again. Sometimes, being cheerful is more than a personality. Sometimes, it's a kind of armor. The fridge humming softly behind you, the glow of your phone lighting up the room at night. You might know that feeling, when smiling becomes easier than explaining why you're tired. SpongeBob never said he was exhausted, but maybe he didn't have to. The way he chased new tasks with such urgency, it almost felt like he was running from silence. But it didn't end there. What made him special wasn't that he succeeded. It was that he kept showing up, even when Squidward rolled his eyes, even when things fell apart, even when the crusty crab felt heavy with boredom. SpongeBob still arrived, believing each day could still surprise him. That kind of hope is rare, and it takes strength to carry it. Maybe more strength than most people realize. You might have felt something like this before, pushing forward, not because you feel unstoppable, but because stopping might make everything feel too real. SpongeBob greeted the morning with excitement, but maybe there was a part of him that never wanted to slow down. In the quiet moments, when the cameras weren't rolling, maybe his thoughts grew louder than his laughter. Still, there's a kind of bravery in being cheerful every day, in finding joy even when things don't turn out the way you hoped. SpongeBob didn't just keep trying. He believed every attempt still mattered, and maybe that's the real reason he felt alive to us. Not because he never struggled, but because he refused to let struggle erase his spirit. Something about that stayed. When the day ends, and your mind starts drifting toward the things you still have to do, maybe there's a little comfort in remembering someone like SpongeBob. Someone who kept going. Someone who made effort feel lighter. Someone who taught us that optimism isn't a performance. It's a choice. And at night, when things go quiet and the air feels heavier than usual, it's easy to wonder if he ever felt exhausted too, when no one was watching. Maybe persistence doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a small smile in the early morning light, hoping the day might still turn out okay. Patrick never worried about expectations. He moved through life like water moving across stones. Slow, calm, unbothered. While SpongeBob sprinted through his mornings, Patrick simply floated. His days never seemed to chase him, and that wasn't the strange part yet. What really lingered was how peaceful he looked while doing nothing at all. There was no rush in his steps, no tension in his voice, just a steady rhythm, like the ocean swallowing and releasing the shore. Maybe we used to be like that too, before grades, jobs, messages, and buzzing notifications started shaping the tempo of our days. Back then, time didn't feel like something slipping away. It just felt like air. Some people think Patrick was foolish, but maybe he just understood something we forgot. Maybe life wasn't supposed to be a constant test. His stillness wasn't laziness. It was acceptance, a silent belief that it's okay to simply exist. You might have felt something like that before, lying on the grass after school, when the sky looked bigger than usual, or watching clouds drift until they melted into each other, the kind of moment that didn't need a purpose. Even now, if you close your eyes, you might still hear faint summer sounds in the background, distant lawnmowers, dogs barking, somebody's radio playing a song with the windows open. Not exciting, but safe. But it didn't end there. Patrick's calmness wasn't loud. It lived in pauses, in those scenes where he simply stared into space, as if thinking took too much energy. Yet somehow, that slow energy brought something valuable. In a world that praises productivity, stillness can start to feel rare, almost rebellious. Patrick never changed to fit the speed of others. He just existed at his own pace. Maybe that's why some people envy him, not because he lacked worries, but because he never let them win. He didn't search for answers before resting. His mind didn't sprint to the next deadline, the next problem, the next decision. His peace came from not needing control. And for listeners lying under dim lights tonight, that kind of mind might sound like something precious, maybe even forgotten. There's comfort in not knowing, not ignorance, just freedom from urgency. Patrick showed that curiosity doesn't always have to travel fast. It can wander. It can wait. Some thoughts don't need conclusions to feel complete, like the slow drift of jellyfish across the water, or the way some memories return in fragments instead of full pictures. Something about that stayed. Patrick never made life complicated. He trusted that days could unfold gently, even if they didn't always make sense. And maybe deep down, many of us still hope that's true. That life can be lived in soft breaths, not just quick steps. That peace doesn't always come from solving everything. Tonight, as your thoughts settle and the air grows still, maybe there's space to imagine a mind that doesn't rush, the kind that doesn't need answers to rest, the kind that drifts, quiet, steady, like Patrick floating peacefully in an ocean that never asked him to hurry. Squidward never really hated SpongeBob. What he hated was being unseen. His art mattered to him, even when no one cared. His clarinet playing, his painting, the way he tried to shape a life that felt meaningful. All of it came from a place deeper than anyone around him seemed to notice. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What felt heavier was how familiar that ache can be. The quiet desire to be understood in a room that wasn't made for you. He wasn't the villain. He was the adult before we were. Tired, a little numb. The kind of person who wakes up not with excitement, but with routine. Walk to work, stand behind a counter, pretend it doesn't hurt when dreams get further away every year. You might have felt something like that before. Sitting at a desk, staring at a blank screen, feeling your thoughts move slower than the clock. But it didn't end there. Squidward still played his clarinet, even when no one listened. Some people call that failure. But maybe it was its own kind of hope. Proof that something inside him refused to go quiet completely. Art isn't always applause. Sometimes it's just survival, a way to speak when words don't reach far enough. There's a certain loneliness in being surrounded by people who don't understand the things that matter to you. Squidward lived between noise and silence, never finding the perfect place to rest. The Krusty Krab felt like a cage, but Bikini Bottom never offered a door that truly led elsewhere. Still, he practiced. Still, he tried. That kind of persistence isn't loud. It's fragile, and fragile things are easier to overlook. You can almost picture his room at night. Dim lamp on the nightstand, clarinet resting against the chair, the sound of distant bubbles outside. You might imagine him playing softly, not for an audience, but for peace. The kind of peace that doesn't have to be earned. The kind that says, you're allowed to exist, even when no one is watching. Maybe that's why Squidward stuck with us as we grew older. As kids, he seemed grumpy, but as adults, he started to look familiar. The person who tried and kept trying, even when life no longer promised applause. That kind of resilience doesn't sell toys, but it mirrors something deeply human. Something about that stayed. He never stopped believing that art mattered. He just struggled to carry that belief alone. And maybe that's what made him hurt. Not rejection, but isolation. When ambition has nowhere to go, it turns into silence, and silence can grow heavy if no one notices. But even in his quietest moments, Squidward held onto a piece of who he wanted to be. Not loudly, not proudly, just steadily, like a note held long enough to keep the room from feeling empty. Tonight, somewhere between the steady hum of the fridge and the dim glow of screens, you might understand him more than you expected. Being seen isn't about fame. It's about feeling real, in a world that often rushes past. Mr. Krabs always counted money, but maybe he was really counting safety. Every coin he kept close wasn't just about gain. It was about protection. Some people grow up believing things can disappear at any moment, and that belief changes the way they walk through life. But that wasn't the surprising part. What mattered more was how fear can become habit. When you've known scarcity, survival becomes second nature. Not bad, just cautious. A kind of caution that never fully lets you relax, even with the lights off. You might have noticed it in his eyes, whenever something felt at risk. The quick tension, the darting look, the way he never wasted a second reaching for whatever he thought might disappear. He didn't chase riches for luxury. He chased them for safety. When you've seen things slip through your fingers, sometimes holding on too tightly feels like the only option left. Something about that stayed. Kids often saw Mr. Krabs as greedy, but adults sometimes see a different story. The story of someone shaped by experience more than desire. Someone who learned early that comfort is fragile, and once you lose it, rebuilding doesn't come easy. You might have felt something like that before, checking bank accounts more often than dreams, calculating decisions instead of feeling them. But it didn't end there. His caution had a rhythm, the kind you can hear in the quiet, when your mind starts building safety nets before sleep. Maybe you felt it, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling every dollar you spent earlier in the day echo across your thoughts. The fridge humming softly in the background, streetlights glimmering through the window. That's when caution becomes something else. Something heavier. Mr. Krabs didn't chase wealth to be admired. He chased it because it was the one thing he felt could guard him from loss. Every locked door, every counted bill, every decision. He wasn't chasing gold. He was trying to protect the little piece he had left. Sometimes, that kind of protection gets mistaken for selfishness. But fear is easier to hide behind than honesty. Maybe that's why his story matters. Because caution doesn't always come from greed. It often comes from memory. A memory that whispers, "Be careful. It could all disappear again." Not angry, not dramatic, just protective. Like someone keeping their hand on the doorknob, even when they're already inside. Something about that lingered as we got older. His character didn't teach us to love money. It taught us to understand why some people hold on so tightly, and maybe to soften toward those who check their locks twice, or hesitate before spending what they've earned. Caution doesn't need loud explanations. It just needs space to be seen. Tonight, as your thoughts quiet down and the room gets still, you might understand Mr. Krabs a little more. Safety isn't greedy. It's human. And sometimes, when the world feels uncertain, survival becomes the only dream worth chasing. Sandy left Texas to explore the world, but the ocean was never home. She smiled, trained, worked hard, and kept moving forward. But something in her voice always sounded like she was holding her breath. Her tree dome was bright and organized, but it always felt just a little too quiet. Not empty, just unfamiliar. Like a hotel room you've stayed in too long. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What lingered more was how ambition can sometimes outgrow the place that once made us feel safe. When Sandy first arrived in Bikini Bottom, everything about her energy felt brave. She built her dome, crafted her gear, adapted to a new world, and never complained. That kind of strength looks impressive from a distance. But when the lights dim and the day finally slows, even the strongest hearts can start to ache for something familiar. You might have felt something like that before, being far from home, but pretending it doesn't matter. Something about her character speaks to people chasing big goals. Those who pack their bags and go where opportunity leads them, hoping the journey will be worth the distance. Maybe that's why her strength feels human, because it was more than confidence. It was sacrifice, too. Dreams sometimes cost comfort, even when we pretend they don't. But it didn't end there. Sandy never wanted pity. She had ambition, purpose, and fire in her spirit. She proved herself day after day. But the way she looked out the window sometimes, the way her voice softened when she talked about Texas, it hinted at the quiet truth behind her confidence. Progress isn't always joyful. Sometimes it's just necessary. The ocean never fully embraced her. It let her stay, but it never became home. Her helmet separated her from everyone else, a reminder that even when she stood next to friends, there was still a fragile layer of distance between her and the world around her. You might know that feeling, being included, but not quite belonging, being seen, but not completely understood. Her tree dome held everything she needed: clean air, warm lighting, good tools, but it lacked the feeling of belonging. Some places have all the right pieces, but still miss the invisible part. The part that lets your shoulders relax the moment you walk through the door. That comfort doesn't come from design. It comes from familiarity, from history, from home. Something about that stayed. Sandy chased her dream all the way to the ocean floor, but her roots remained above water. And maybe that's okay. Maybe dreams and homes don't always have to live in the same place. Some listeners out there might know that feeling too well. Chasing something they can't quite name, hoping it's worth it. Tonight, if the air in your room feels a little too still, and your thoughts begin to wander where they used to be, maybe Sandy's story makes sense in a deeper way. Ambition doesn't erase homesickness. It just teaches us how to walk with it, quietly, patiently, toward whatever tomorrow looks like. Plankton tried to win, but maybe he just wanted someone to celebrate with. His plans were loud. His ideas were bigger than the room he stood in. But his table only had one chair. The chum bucket always looked like a restaurant, but it felt more like a diary. Every blueprint, every jar of ingredients, every late-night idea. Those were his entries, not written on paper, but written in effort. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What stayed quieter was how loneliness can live inside ambition, without ever saying its name. He wasn't heartless. He was hopeful. Hopeful that someone would finally look his way. Hopeful that his mind mattered as much as his mistakes. You might have felt something like that before. Working late, when no one else is awake. Chasing a thought, because it won't let you go. The fridge humming softly. Streetlights sneaking through the window blinds. And the sound of your own breathing louder than it should be. That's when idea chasing turns into something deeper. A search for validation. Something about Plankton resonated with overthinkers. He didn't just plan. He lived inside his plans. Every scheme, every invention, every comeback attempt. It wasn't about power. It was about finally being seen. Some people spend more time on projects than sleep. Not for recognition, but for meaning. And sometimes, meaning is just another word for connection. But it didn't end there. Loneliness doesn't always look sad. Sometimes, it wears ambition like armor. Plankton stood tall, spoke loudly, argued with the world. But behind all that noise was a quiet desire to share success with someone. Anyone. Even a single nod of understanding might have been enough. The truth is, solitude can push people to work harder than applause ever could. Plankton's struggle wasn't about greed. It was about purpose. The fear that his mind might be capable of great things. But no one would stay long enough to notice. Sometimes, you realize that the hardest part of dreaming isn't failure. It's dreaming alone. You might imagine him in the chum bucket after hours. The lights low, the stove turned off, his chair still pulled close to the table. Maybe he rewrote the same plan again and again, not because it would work, but because giving up felt quieter than trying. And silence, to someone like him, might have been the scariest sound of all. Something about that stayed long after the episode ended. Plankton wasn't trying to conquer Bikini Bottom. He was trying to earn a moment worth sharing. A moment of being understood. Ambition doesn't always come from power. Sometimes it comes from loneliness. A quiet wish to be seen without needing to shout. It's easy to label him a villain, but listen closely, and there's vulnerability in every plan he made. Not to take over the world, but to finally find a seat at someone else's table. And tonight, as thoughts begin to slow, and the room grows still, maybe his story feels familiar, in a way that only arrives when the world goes quiet. The Krusty Krab was always loud during the day. Orders being shouted, grills sizzling, footsteps bouncing across the floor. But after closing, it probably went quiet. Not an empty kind of quiet, more like a sigh, as if the building itself finally got the chance to rest. The fryers might have still clicked softly while they cooled down, and maybe a broom leaned against the wall like it was tired too. But the strange part wasn't the silence itself. It was how peaceful it felt, like the place had its own heartbeat once the lights dimmed. When people leave their workplaces, they take their voices with them, but they often leave their energy behind. You might have felt something like that before, walking through an empty office, a classroom after hours, or a store right before closing. The air changes. Footsteps echo. Even small sounds feel bigger than usual, and in a way, the space starts to feel alive in its own quiet way. Something about that moment stayed. SpongeBob probably cleaned the tables slowly, not rushing, just moving with that same gentle rhythm he always had. Maybe the smell of grease lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of cleaning supplies. That combination, familiar and faintly nostalgic, might remind some people of their own late-night shifts. Walking home afterward, backpack or apron slung over one shoulder, hoping the streets would stay quiet enough to think. But it didn't end there. Late workplaces have a certain comfort. Not joyful comfort, but a kind of understanding. Like they've seen you at your tiredest and don't need you to pretend. When the last customer leaves and chairs get stacked on tables, a new kind of calm settles in. Not because you're free, but because the pressure finally steps aside. You might imagine SpongeBob switching off the lights one by one, the sign outside still glowing in the dark as he locks the door. The parking lot empty, except for the moonlight stretching across the pavement. Those are the moments when thoughts grow louder, the ones you've been too busy to hear all day. Sometimes, that's when life feels the most real. When you're walking home after a long shift, and the world feels a little too big, and your footsteps sound louder than usual. There's a certain comfort in knowing the Krusty Krab remains steady, even when it's empty, like a friend who doesn't need to speak to make you feel understood. The walls might remember every laugh, every mistake, every victory. Places can hold memories, even after we've forgotten them, and sometimes, late at night, they might even feel like they're holding us too. Something about that stayed. The Krusty Krab didn't just serve food. It witnessed lives, SpongeBob's dreams, Squidward's sighs, Mr. Krabs' worries, and when the doors closed, those stories didn't disappear. They just rested, waiting for morning. And maybe that's why quiet workplaces feel so familiar to people who keep going, even when they're tired. Not because they feel empty, but because, in their silence, they finally feel honest. Sometimes, Squidward stared out his window, not angry, just distant. His house didn't glow brightly at night. It stayed dim, with a lamp beside his chair that cast a soft orange light across the room. Somehow that small glow always looked warmer when everything else was dark. It made his space feel like a pause instead of a home. But that wasn't the unusual part. What mattered more was how still he became. Like silence had weight. You might have seen it before. Squidward sitting with his clarinet nearby, not playing it, just holding it. Not sad, not excited, just somewhere in between. Those are the kinds of moments that don't get animated for kids, but adults tend to notice them more. The kind of quiet that says more than a sentence ever could. Maybe at midnight, when Bikini Bottom slept, Squidward wondered if he chose the right path. He chased his dream of being an artist. He didn't get far. Dreams don't always fail suddenly. Sometimes they expire the way milk does in the fridge. Not all at once. Not dramatic. Just little by little. Until one day, something inside feels past its date. But it didn't end there. Squidward never admitted that feeling out loud. He kept it in his routine, in his eyes, in the way his shoulders slumped just a little when mornings came too fast. And maybe that's why his sighs mattered. They weren't loud. They were soft, tired ones, the kind a lot of adults understand, even if they never talk about it. Sometimes, the view outside a window feels different at night. Streetlights look more distant. The shadows of trees stretch longer, and the world feels wide in a way that makes choices feel heavier. You might have had nights like that. You finish the day, sit down for just a moment, and suddenly every path you didn't take feels like it's whispering from far away. But Squidward kept the lamp on. Even on nights when his thoughts wandered too far, he stayed present enough to keep the light going. That's its own kind of persistence. Not noisy, not heroic, just steady. Maybe he believed that tomorrow still had a chance to surprise him, even if today didn't. And maybe that belief, small as it was, kept him from giving up. Something about that stayed. Squidward wasn't hopeless. He was just tired. And tired isn't the end. It's just another place life asks us to pass through. In his own way, he showed that being disappointed and still continuing is a form of strength. Not the kind people clap for, but the kind that makes it through the night. You might imagine the fridge humming behind him, the faint echo of distant bubbles outside, and Squidward staring through the glass, finding comfort in knowing the world is bigger than his worries. Sometimes just seeing the night reminds us we aren't trapped. We're just thinking. Maybe that's why his window mattered. Not as an escape, but as a reminder that life is still moving, and he's still here to watch it. There's a bus stop in Bikini Bottom that hardly gets used. No crowds, no lines, just a bench, a sign, and the quiet. When SpongeBob waited there, time always seemed to move slower. Not because the clock changed, but because everything around him stopped trying so hard. The air felt still, the ground felt thoughtful, and the sky didn't seem to be in any kind of hurry. But that wasn't the strange part. What stayed deeper was how waiting can sometimes feel like a place of its own. Most towns have a spot like that. A corner that doesn't need noise to exist. It might be at the edge of a park, behind a fence at school, or near a streetlight that flickers on too early. A spot where you can hear your own breath and think about everything and nothing at the same time. Not sad, just waiting. Like the future is on its way, but taking the long road here. Something about that moment stayed. SpongeBob didn't rush while sitting on that bench. He didn't panic. He didn't plan. He simply waited, with hope in his eyes. That kind of patience is rare. Waiting without knowing what for. That's a feeling a lot of people carry quietly. Especially late at night, when everything slows down and thoughts wander farther than sleep does. But it didn't end there. Waiting has its own rhythm. The soft tap of shoes against the ground. The way the wind brushes past your face like it's checking in. Even the silence feels alive, like it's making space for something new, something unknown. Places like that don't ask for explanations. They just offer room to breathe when the mind feels too full. You might have felt something like that before. Sitting in your car before going inside, taking the long route home, or standing by a window just a little longer than needed. Not because anything is wrong, but because you want a moment to feel the world moving around you without needing to catch up. The quiet kind of waiting that doesn't rush, doesn't demand, just lets you exist. Sometimes that's what people crave most. Not answers, not direction, just a pause. A moment when life doesn't push forward, but doesn't fall apart either. SpongeBob sitting on that bench was more than a joke. It was a reflection of the times we wait, without knowing what's supposed to come next. a stillness that understands us, even when we can't describe what we're waiting for. Something about that stayed. The empty bus stop wasn't empty. It was holding space, for questions not yet shaped, for hopes not yet named, and for hearts still learning how to rest without reaching. Waiting doesn't mean nothing is happening. It just means something hasn't revealed itself yet. Like clouds forming slowly before rain, like tides turning beneath the surface, like thoughts shifting gently before dreams arrive to carry them someplace softer. Maybe that bus stop still exists somewhere, in a quiet corner of the mind. A place that doesn't ask why you're there, only that you're allowed to sit until the next part arrives. Goo Lagoon was always bright during the day, sunlight stretching across the sand, voices bouncing off the water, footprints scattered like notes in a song. Kids ran, waves rolled, and time felt wide open. But the real beauty might have come later, when the sun started sinking behind the horizon, when the light thinned and things got a little quieter. That wasn't the loud part of the day. It was the part that felt like a memory before it even ended. Maybe the waves got softer as evening came, like they were tired too. Maybe laughter echoed briefly before fading out into the wind. You might imagine the sand still holding the shape of footsteps from earlier, gripping those last traces of the day, like memories trying to stay just a little longer. Some people miss summer evenings more than entire seasons, especially the ones where nobody said much. But somehow, everything felt okay anyway. That feeling stayed. The warmth of the day didn't disappear. It just slowed down, like it was wrapping itself around the air. Sometimes dusk carries a kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. You don't have to speak. You don't even have to think. You just have to sit and let the world dim gently around you. You might have felt something like that, sitting outside with friends as the sky turned pale orange, knowing the day was ending but not wanting to get up yet. The air cooler against sun-warmed skin, someone kicking at the sand just to hear the soft crunch of it. No rush, no rules, just time existing without expectation. But it didn't end there. The beauty of Goo Lagoon at dusk wasn't only visual, it was emotional. The kind of peace that arrives after you've used up all your energy and finally let your shoulders relax, like waking up from a nap you didn't plan to take, that slow return to comfort. And when night finally approached, the lagoon probably exhaled. The world shrank just a bit. Footsteps grew quieter. Conversations softened. Sometimes, that's when people feel most connected. Not during the fun, but during the calm that follows it. You might have heard a lifeguard chair creak in the breeze. Maybe someone's flip-flops slapped gently against the sand as they walked away. There's a melody hidden in those sounds, one that stays long after the sky goes dark. Something about that stayed, the way the sun dipped low and made every shadow look longer, the way light reflected across the water one last time before surrendering to night, the way summer felt like it might last forever, even when you kind of knew it wouldn't. Goo Lagoon at dusk wasn't just a place. It was a feeling, the kind that comes quietly and leaves quietly too. The memory of warmth, even after the day cools down. The sense that everything might be okay, even if tomorrow arrives differently. And maybe the most honest part of childhood wasn't the excitement of the day, but the calm that came when the day had nothing left to prove. There are streets in Bikini Bottom we never really saw. Nameless roads, quiet sidewalks, corners that didn't need attention to exist. They probably had stories of their own. Not big ones. Just tiny, unnoticed moments that only happened when no one was watching. A door closing gently. A porch light flickering on. The kind of things that don't demand memory, but still linger in it. But that wasn't the unusual part. What stood out more was how those empty roads made it easy to wonder about the lives we never lived. Sometimes, life feels like that too. Like you could have walked down a different path, met different people, found different happiness, struggled in different ways. Late at night, those thoughts tend to slip in quietly when the fridge hums and streetlights paint faint lines across the wall. Not loud thoughts, just curious ones. The kind that ask what might have happened if you had turned left instead of right. But it didn't end there. Curiosity doesn't always come with sadness. Sometimes it just arrives as a soft observation. A reminder that life is full of doors we walked past without opening. And that's okay. Because not every possibility needs to become a reality. Some are simply there to remind us that choice is powerful, that we've been steering our path all along, even when it didn't feel like it. In Bikini Bottom, every unnamed street might have held a quiet story. A jellyfish drifting past someone's window, a sign someone forgot to take down, a house with music playing to an audience of none. Places like that exist everywhere. In towns, in memories, in moments. Paths that exist not to be taken, but to make the world feel bigger. You might have felt something like this before, walking through your neighborhood and taking a different route home just to see what was there. Or finding an old yearbook and wondering how different everything could have been. Those thoughts aren't regrets. They're just reminders of how many versions of ourselves quietly exist inside us. Something about that stayed. Maybe the road you're on isn't a mistake, just a chapter still being written. Maybe it isn't supposed to be clear yet. Maybe clarity is something that shows up quietly, like sunrise on a slow morning, when everything finally has enough light. The streets we didn't choose still matter. They give shape to the ones we did. They form the outline of every decision we've made, without needing to appear in the picture. And knowing that might bring a small kind of peace, the kind that lets you breathe a little easier before sleep. Because maybe life isn't about finding the perfect road. Maybe it's about walking the one in front of you and noticing the view while it lasts. And if someday you decide to change direction, that doesn't erase the steps you've taken. It just means the story found a new scene to unfold in. Tonight, as things go still and the air feels gentle, maybe it's enough to trust that wherever you're headed is still being written, and that's enough for now. At night, the ocean probably sounded different. Slower, deeper, like it finally had time to think. During the day, it moved with all kinds of energy, but when the sky darkened and the air cooled, its rhythm changed. It wasn't trying to impress anyone. It just breathed, softly, steadily, like someone who finally got to sit down after a long day. But that wasn't the strange part yet. If you listened closely, really closely, it almost felt like the sound knew your name. Not loudly, just gently. You might imagine the tide rolling in like a calm heartbeat, carrying stories across the water. Small ones, lost ones, the kind that never got an ending. The moonlight would ripple across the surface like it was writing something that only the waves could read. Some memories only come back when things get quiet enough, and the ocean is one of the few places where silence feels alive. Something about that stayed. Maybe the ocean at night reflected our thoughts more clearly than any mirror could. When SpongeBob and his friends rested, Bikini Bottom probably felt different too. Houses dimmed, streets emptied. The crusty Krabs stood still, its neon sign flickering softly. And somewhere beneath the hush, the ocean kept moving. Not fast, not loud, just consistent, like the steady ticking of a clock nobody bothers to look at. But it didn't end there. Sometimes people need that kind of rhythm. Not answers, not noise, just something that proves the world is still moving at a peaceful pace, even when everything else feels way too fast. You might have felt it while lying in bed, listening to distant cars outside, or hearing the wind push gently against the window. Sounds that remind you you're not the only thing awake. The ocean never judged anyone. It just accepted. It didn't tell you what to do. It simply reminded you that life flows with or without your permission. Waves don't need permission to change direction. They just do. Maybe that's why watching the ocean is calming, because it proves that motion can be quiet and still meaningful. You might picture the water glowing under moonlight, with faint reflections of clouds drifting above it. No bright colors, no rush, just slow movement, the kind that helps the mind finally loosen its grip on the day. It's easy to imagine that if the ocean could speak, it wouldn't use words. It would just keep moving forward, showing that progress can be silent. Something about that stayed. When everything else feels big, the ocean at night feels patient. When thoughts begin to spin, it reminds us that even circles find their way forward. And when silence feels heavy, the water makes room for it, so it doesn't have to feel like a burden. And maybe that's the quiet truth hiding beneath the waves. The world doesn't always need clarity to keep going. Sometimes it only needs courage and a little faith that tomorrow will still arrive, whether we're ready or not. SpongeBob always had plans. Work, jellyfishing, visiting Patrick, making lists. His days seemed to run on excitement, like he woke up already halfway into an adventure. But maybe all that energy came from a fear of stopping, because stopping can feel like silence, and silence can be loud sometimes. That wasn't the obvious part to notice as a kid, but as we got older, it started to look different. The busier he stayed, the further he stayed from the quiet. You might have felt something like that before, filling your day with tasks, music, messages, anything to keep thoughts from getting too loud. It's not weakness. It's just a way of coping. Some feelings echo longer than others, especially after the lights go out. The TV stops humming, the phone screen fades, and suddenly, the room feels bigger than it did during the day. But it didn't end there. SpongeBob didn't avoid silence with sadness. He avoided it with enthusiasm. That's what made it hard to notice. His joy was real, but maybe it was also a shield. When he invited Patrick over or tackled a new idea, maybe he wasn't just having fun. Maybe he was keeping the pace fast enough that nothing internal could catch up. Some people stay moving because stillness asks questions they don't feel ready to answer. Questions like, what if I'm not okay? What if I don't know who I am without things to do? SpongeBob never said those words out loud, but sometimes You could see a flicker in his eyes when things briefly went quiet. Not sadness, just hesitation. You might picture him sitting alone in his pineapple house after a long day, the fridge humming softly, the clock ticking a little too clearly, and maybe for just a moment he paused, looked around, felt the weight of silence, then stood back up and wrote another plan on his list, not because he was excited, but because motion felt safer than stillness. Something about that stayed. We often praise productivity, how much someone accomplishes, how full their days are. But fullness is different from peace. SpongeBob's schedule was always full. But was it peaceful? Maybe sometimes. Maybe not others. That's the gentle truth most people discover on their own timeline. Being busy can look like strength, but it might also be fear wearing a smile. Still, there's nothing wrong with trying to keep going. Effort means hope is still alive. And even if SpongeBob feared being alone, he never stopped believing in connection. He kept showing up, kept reaching out, kept smiling. That's a kind of courage, too. The kind that doesn't need spotlight or applause. Just one more reason to wake up early and keep moving. Tonight, as things settle and the world outside your window grows quiet, maybe you understand him more than you thought you did. Maybe you know what it feels like to keep your day busy so the night doesn't feel too long. And if you do, that's okay. Some feelings simply ask to be recognized, not fixed. Patrick didn't understand everything that happened around him, and that might have been his strength. He lived in a world that moved quickly, yet somehow stayed untouched by pressure. Deadlines didn't chase him. Expectations didn't weigh him down. While others asked why, he simply existed. Not lost, just unbothered, like lying on your back, looking at clouds, letting them drift without trying to name their shapes. But that wasn't the surprising part. What stuck deeper was how peaceful it felt to watch someone live without needing answers all the time. Growing up, questions start to multiply. What comes next? What should I do? Am I doing enough? Those thoughts sneak into our mornings, settle into our nights. But Patrick never rushed himself into those corners. His world seemed to move like a slow tide, coming in, going out, without urgency. Maybe he didn't lack thought. Maybe he had a different kind of wisdom, the kind that doesn't chase conclusions, but waits for them to arrive naturally. Something about that stayed. Patrick's calm wasn't exciting or dramatic. It was just enough. The gentle kind of peace that lives in small pauses, sitting in the backyard after school, staring at the sky while waiting for dinner, moments that didn't need purpose to feel real. You might have known that kind of silence once, the kind you didn't have to earn. But it didn't end there. Patrick reminds us of a version of ourselves we sometimes lose, before pressure shaped our choices, before time felt limited, before numbers, grades, paychecks, bills began to measure our worth. He lived untouched by that world, and maybe that's why being around him always felt calming, even on screen. He didn't try to solve life. He simply lived it. There's a quiet freedom in not needing answers every minute. Life doesn't always need to make sense to feel meaningful. Kids understand that instinctively. Adults often have to relearn it. And sometimes, watching Patrick sit contentedly on his rock felt like permission to slow down too. To breathe without achievement. To exist without urgency. To remember that not all thought needs to have direction. You might imagine him now, lying in the sand, eyes half closed, listening to waves roll gently across the shore. The kind of moment that doesn't ask for anything. The kind that simply allows space to be. That's not ignorance. It's acceptance. A rare kind of peace that can't be forced. Something about that stayed long after the episode ended. Patrick didn't chase clarity. He floated, and in a strange way, that might have made him one of the wisest characters of all. Not because he knew little, but because he trusted that things would unfold in their own time. Tonight, as thoughts slow and the air grows still, maybe there's comfort in remembering Patrick's simplicity. Maybe the mind doesn't always need answers to rest. Maybe a quiet evening, a steady breath, and a moment of stillness is enough. For now. We used to think Squidward was just grumpy, but maybe he was exhausted. The kind of tired that doesn't shout or break down. It just lingers quietly in the background, like a low tide that never fully recedes. Maybe there was a time when he tried, really tried, and didn't get far enough. That kind of disappointment lives deep. It doesn't yell, it sighs, but the world doesn't always hear sighs. Sometimes it labels them as bitterness, or laziness, or failure. But maybe sighs are just tired dreams, still breathing, but softer now. Something about Squidward felt familiar once we got older. He wasn't cruel. He was just worn out from chasing something that never quite unfolded. You might have felt something like that before, working hard for a goal, then quietly watching it drift away, like a balloon slipping from your hand on a windy day. It doesn't explode, it just keeps floating upward until it disappears into the sky. But it didn't end there. Despite his frustration, Squidward kept a small piece of his dream alive. He never stopped playing the clarinet, even when no one clapped, even when every note echoed through an empty room. That kind of persistence is gentle, but powerful. Sometimes, it's not the loudest fight that matters. Sometimes, it's the quiet refusal to stop creating, even when the world doesn't seem to care. You might imagine him sitting alone after work, the lamplight warm against his skin, his clarinet resting on his knee. Maybe he played a melody that meant something only to him, not for applause, just because it still lived inside him. That's a form of strength rarely talked about. Continuing even when hope feels thin. Many people understand that feeling better than they'd like to admit. The kind of emotional fatigue that shows up without warning. You wake up, brush your teeth, go to work, come home, and somewhere in between, a dream quietly asks if you still remember it. Squidward did, every time he picked up that clarinet. There's a certain bravery in creating without recognition, in practicing without praise, in dreaming without guarantees. The fridge humming softly at night, the clock ticking in the next room, the air settling into evening. That's when quiet ambition feels most fragile, but also most real. Something about that stayed. Squidward's disappointment didn't erase his passion. It just made it quieter, like a candle in a windy room, trembling but still lit. And maybe that's why, deep down, he wasn't a symbol of failure. He was a reminder that dreams don't always disappear. Sometimes they just soften so they can survive. Tonight, as things slow down and thoughts stretch across your mind, Maybe there's comfort in knowing that persistence doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like playing an instrument alone in the dark, believing that music still matters, even if the world doesn't listen. Squidward's story wasn't about giving up. It was about endurance, the kind that doesn't ask for applause, the kind that simply hopes tomorrow carries a different tune. Mr. Krabs chased money, but maybe he chased safety. To most people, it looked like greed, but sometimes protection can look a lot like possession. When you grow up afraid of losing things, you learn to hold on too tightly, not because you want more, but because you're scared of ending up with less. That wasn't the obvious lesson in his character, but it was always there, under the surface. The fear of losing what little you have can follow you like a shadow, even on the brightest days. Some people save scraps, write down expenses, skip treats, not out of selfishness, but out of memory. A memory that whispers, "This could disappear again." And when that thought settles into your bones, survival becomes second nature. It's not cruel. It's cautious. You might have felt something like that before, thinking twice before buying something you want, because the thought of regret sounds louder than the thrill of having it. But it didn't end there. Mr. Krabs didn't want piles of gold. He wanted peace. He wanted a feeling that things were going to be okay tomorrow, that his doors would still be open, that his lights would still turn on. When comfort feels temporary, holding tight can feel like the only way to keep life steady. Maybe that's why his character hits differently as an adult. Kids see obsession. Adults might see reflection. A man shaped by scarcity, trying to build something he never had. Every locked safe, every counted coin, every panicked glance at a receipt. Those were signs of fear, not desire. You might imagine him late at night, alone in the crusty Krab, checking the register one last time before turning off the lights. The air thick with cooking oil and old memories. The floorboards creaking quietly under his steps. Maybe he walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because spaces that once felt lively turn heavier when everyone leaves. Places hold memories, and sometimes memories hold weight. Something about that stayed. His story didn't have a villain. It had a history that never fully healed. When you come from little, every gain feels fragile. And even when you've earned something, part of you might still wait for it to slip away. That doesn't make someone greedy. It makes them human. There's a quiet kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly preserving what you've built. Like locking doors twice. Like checking bank accounts more than dreams. Like planning for tomorrow before enjoying today. It's not joyless. It's protective. And it's more common than most people admit. Mr. Krabs didn't chase money because he loved it. He chased it because somewhere deep down, he feared what life looked like without it. He wasn't trying to be rich. He was trying to feel safe. And maybe that's one of the most human reasons of all. Tonight, if you've ever counted dollars more than memories, know this. Protection isn't failure. It's a response. And sometimes, it's the only way people learn to survive. Sandy had adventure, success, respect. But her tree dome always looked a little empty. It was clean, organized, efficient, everything a hard worker could need. And yet, there was a stillness inside it that felt different from peace. It wasn't quiet the way a home settles at night. It was quiet the way a hotel room does after you unpack your bags and realize the walls don't know your name. That wasn't something we saw as kids, but as adults, it gets easier to notice. She left Texas for something bigger. She built her dome. She pushed herself forward. She accomplished things, but sometimes achievement brings quiet evenings instead of loud celebrations. Some victories don't echo. They fade. The applause ends long before the loneliness does, and when the lights go dim and the day slows down, even big dreams start to feel a little small. Something about that stayed. Sandy spoke proudly about her life underwater, but there was always a softness when she mentioned Texas. A shift in her tone, like a memory touching the edge of her voice. You might have heard that same tone in someone who left home for college or moved to another state for work. Pride mixed with distance, excitement mixed with echo. But it didn't end there. Belonging is different from accomplishment. You can win awards, build routines, fill your calendar, and still feel something missing. Not sadness, necessarily, just a gap. Like part of your heart remembers a different kind of air, the kind that doesn't need explanation, the kind that belongs to childhood skies. You might imagine Sandy lying in bed after a long day of training, staring at the ceiling as the dome settled into stillness. The faint sound of machines keeping her habitat running. The silence that follows effort. The kind that reminds you success has weight too. Maybe she thought about open fields and warm wind. Maybe she pictured a sky without glass above it. That's the quiet truth of ambition. It can take you far, but it can't always take home with you. And sometimes, sacrificing comfort becomes part of the journey, not because you don't care, but because dreams sometimes ask you to pack light. Something about that stayed. Sandy wasn't lonely because she failed. She felt lonely because she succeeded somewhere unfamiliar, and that feeling is more common than people admit. Some listeners might lie in bed tonight, scrolling under dim lights, wondering if the lives they built are allowed to feel both strong and homesick at the same time. Her story didn't teach us to stop chasing things. It just reminded us that goals and belonging aren't always neighbors. They might live in different places, both worth reaching for, but rarely at the same time. And knowing that doesn't make ambition wrong. It just makes it human. Tonight, if your room feels a little too quiet, maybe you'll think of Sandy, not as someone who left home, but as someone still finding it, even if someday it exists in more than one place. Plankton tried to win a battle, but maybe he was just trying to be heard. To most of Bikini Bottom, the chum bucket looked like a failing restaurant, but to him, it was a place to try again, and again, and again. Each new plan scribbled across blueprints wasn't a scheme. It was a message. I'm still here. That wasn't obvious when we watched as kids, but as we got older, it started to feel familiar. Some people don't want applause. They just want proof that someone knows they're there. The chum bucket never looked cozy. It wasn't built for comfort, but maybe Plankton didn't want comfort. Maybe he just wanted acknowledgement. When dreams are ignored for too long, ambition turns lonely, and loneliness doesn't always cry. It improvises. It finds new ways to speak, even if the world keeps turning a deaf ear. But it didn't end there. Plankton's plans weren't just about winning. They were about existing loudly enough that silence couldn't swallow him whole. He spoke boldly, because quiet felt unbearable. Sometimes, silence doesn't mean calm. It means disappearance. And disappearing is a fear deeper than failure. You might have felt something like that, staying up late, working on projects no one asked for, ideas stretching across notes and screens, fueled not by ego, but by the hope that someone might one day see the effort behind them. The fridge humming quietly, the clock moving with steady indifference, your own breathing becoming the only rhythm in the room. Those moments aren't always sad, but they are undeniably human. Something about Plankton stuck with adults more than kids. He wasn't just a villain. He was the person trying to build proof of his own existence. The one who believed that if he just succeeded once, everything would make sense. But purpose built on validation is fragile. It can crack easily, even when the dream is still intact. Still, he kept going. That effort matters. Those plans, no matter how wild, were symbols of persistence. And persistence is a form of hope. Just quiet, sometimes shaky, but still alive. Every failure he faced was loud, because silence would have meant surrender. If nobody reacted, if nobody noticed, it would feel like being erased. Something about that stayed. Ambition rooted in loneliness is easy to misunderstand. It can look aggressive or irrational. But beneath it can be something simple, a desire to be acknowledged, to leave even a small mark before life moves on without you. Tonight, maybe someone listening feels that echo. The kind of yearning that doesn't ask for applause, only presence. Not victory, just visibility. That subtle hope that someone might, even once, look across the room and say, I see you. That's more powerful than most achievements. So, maybe Plankton's story wasn't about taking over Bikini Bottom. Maybe it was about trying to fill a quiet space inside him, the kind of space that only recognition could ease, even briefly, because sometimes the loudest plans come from the deepest silence, and the courage to speak against it. Sometimes going home doesn't mean traveling anywhere. It just means remembering something that once made you feel safe. A voice, a theme song, a cartoon that smiled even when you didn't. Little things that didn't fix the day, but made it softer. Maybe that's why SpongeBob still feels comforting now. He reminds us of mornings when nothing was complicated yet, when cereal tasted sweeter, and the living room light felt like a warm blanket. Not happy, not sad, just okay. And sometimes, that kind of okay is all we really need before falling asleep. You might remember waking up before anyone else, padding across the floor in socks, turning on the TV, and letting the room light up with colors that didn't ask for your attention. They simply invited it. The sunlight through the window, the slow rumble of the fridge, the way the house felt almost like it was waking up with you. Those moments were quiet, but they never felt empty. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The real comfort came from how natural it all felt, like breathing. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a rhythm you once knew by heart. The theme song of SpongeBob had that rhythm, a familiar rise and fall, a melody that automatically loosened your shoulders. You didn't have to think when it played. You just listened. And somewhere between those notes, something inside you felt seen. But it didn't end there. As we grew older, we traded those mornings for alarms, traffic, messages, responsibilities. Yet somehow, the feeling didn't vanish completely. It hid instead. inside small things. A flash of yellow and blue on the TV when flipping channels. A box of cereal that tastes close to how it used to. A laugh track that brings back summer break mornings, and the quiet freedom of being too young to worry about anything. Sometimes, going home means realizing that memory has its own kind of doorway, one that opens not with keys, but with familiarity. You might not have the same room, the same routine, or the same people around you, but something in the heart still remembers how to return, not fully, but enough to feel the warmth. Something about that stayed. Maybe that's why nostalgia doesn't always come with clarity. It often arrives as a feeling, subtle and passing, like a breeze coming through a window you forgot was open. You catch it for a second, and then it drifts away. But the soft part, it always leaves something behind. Tonight, if you're lying in bed and letting the day settle, maybe you'll feel it too. That quiet pull toward a version of yourself that wasn't trying so hard. The version who didn't need answers to fall asleep. And if your mind needs a place to rest, maybe Bikini Bottom is still there. Not on a map, but in the kind of memory that waits patiently for us to slow down. Sometimes, going home doesn't mean traveling anywhere. It just means remembering how it felt once. Every episode ended quietly, not with big fireworks or dramatic pauses, but with a slow fade, colors softening, music gently backing away like it didn't want to interrupt whatever came next. As kids, we rarely paid attention to that last frame. Our minds were already drifting to the next thing. But as adults, that final moment hits differently. It doesn't ask for attention. It simply steps aside, like someone holding a door open and waiting until you're ready. That wasn't the loudest part of the show, but it might have been the most human. Endings don't always know how to announce themselves. They often arrive gently, like footsteps across carpet. Maybe that's why the final frame of SpongeBob episodes felt so peaceful, because it didn't need to explain itself. The music didn't rush. The picture didn't freeze. It just exhaled, the same way people do after finishing a long day. You might have felt something like that before, turning off the lights and standing still for a moment, as if you're letting the air settle before moving on. Something about that stayed. The final frame wasn't just an ending. It was a permission slip, a soft way of saying, "You've seen enough for today. Go rest." There's a tenderness in that, a kind of respect for the viewer, as if the show knew when to stop talking so your thoughts could start listening. But it didn't end there. Those tiny moments at the end carried their own meaning. The shadows in the background, the small wave of sound, the fading colors, they all spoke without words. They didn't need applause. They didn't even need memory. They just wanted to land gently, the way leaves land when the wind finally stops pushing. Maybe the best memories are like that too. They don't leave loudly. They don't shut doors. They wait, patiently, quietly, until we're done, and then follow us into dreams. Sometimes, the most important feelings aren't the ones we chase. They're the ones that stay behind, like echo after a song, lingering long enough to let us remember we heard something beautiful. Think about those moments, after an episode ended. The silence of the room, the TV screen dimming, the soft hum still lingering in the air. You might have gotten up slowly, leaving the remote on the couch. Maybe daylight faded through the window, painting the walls with that late afternoon color that always felt a little sleepy. Not dramatic, just enough to make you feel like the day had earned its rest. Something about that stayed with us, because life is mostly made of small endings, the kind you hardly notice until they've already passed. The last day of summer break. The final time you ate breakfast before school. The last moment a room felt familiar, before everything changed. Not sad, not tragic, just quiet. Tonight, if things feel heavy or confusing, maybe think of those last frames, the ones that never asked to be remembered, but somehow still were. They remind us that gentleness is its own kind of strength, and that endings don't always mean goodbye. Sometimes they just mean pause. You can probably still hear the theme song in your head. Not perfectly, just enough to feel something. That low strum at the start, the sudden shout, the upbeat rhythm that followed like morning sunlight breaking through the blinds. You don't have to sing it out loud to know it's still there. It's the kind of sound that knows exactly where it belongs in your memory, like a light that never fully switches off, even when the room goes dark. Music from childhood always stays nearby. It drifts through corridors of memory like warm air, moving through a house. You might be going about your day, tired or distracted, and suddenly a single note of something familiar rings in your mind. Soft, but clear. Almost like it knocks before walking in. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What felt deeper was how those melodies carried more than just a tune. They carried feelings your heart didn't know how to name at the time. Something about that stayed. The SpongeBob theme didn't just start episodes. It signaled safety. It meant the day was beginning on a hopeful note. On summer mornings, maybe you'd pour cereal while that song played faintly from the living room TV. No pressure, no deadlines, just the feeling of having time. Even now, the memory has its own rhythm, like footsteps you can still recognize, even if you're far from where they first walked. But it didn't end there. Some songs aren't meant to be forgotten. They simply wait in the background, ready to return when you slow down enough to let them. You might hear it while folding laundry, or during a long drive, or late at night when you're scrolling through old photos. Not loudly, just a faint trace of it, somewhere behind the quiet. Almost like it knows when your heart could use a familiar sound. There's science behind memory and music, but explanations never quite cover what it feels like. Hearing a childhood song is different from remembering one. When you hear it, even inside your own mind, the air shifts, your shoulders loosen, the world suddenly feels less sharp. It's like somebody turned down the volume on everything else, so one tiny memory could speak a little louder. Maybe you've noticed that music doesn't just stay in your ears. It stays in your body. Certain melodies make you breathe slower. Certain voices make you feel understood. Certain rhythms echo in the feet of old hallways, and how you used to jump off curbs, just as a beat dropped. That kind of memory isn't archived. It's alive. Something about that stayed. The SpongeBob theme song wasn't just catchy. It was dependable. It didn't ask questions. It didn't judge. It simply showed up, reminding you that joy didn't always need a reason. It still doesn't. Tonight, as things grow quiet and sleep begins to approach, maybe you'll hear it again. Not to make you wake up, but to help you rest. A gentle reminder that somewhere inside you, laughter, light, and the rhythm of simple days still exist. We carry memories we don't talk about. Not because we're hiding them, just because they live quietly. They settle into the corners of our hearts, the way dust settles onto shelves, slowly, softly, without asking permission. Some feelings don't need a name to exist. They just stay. And with time, we stop trying to explain them. But that wasn't the strange part. What mattered more was how those feelings sometimes find their own places to rest, places outside of us. For a lot of people, SpongeBob wasn't just entertainment. He was a place to store emotions too soft to explain. Moments of loneliness, small victories, silent worries, emotions that kids feel long before they learn the words for them. You might remember sitting in front of the TV after school, letting the scenes unfold without realizing your heart was quietly sorting itself out. The theme song playing softly from the next room, a bowl of cereal half finished, the sun fading through the blinds. No big answers, just presence. Something about that stayed. SpongeBob didn't try to fix anything. He didn't offer solutions. He simply sat with us, like a friend who understands silence better than words. And sometimes, that's all someone needs, to be accompanied rather than advised. A quiet reminder that existing is enough, even when explanations don't come easily. But it didn't end there. As we got older, we began to carry more. Plans, expectations, old disappointments, the kind of weight that doesn't always show up in words, but appears in sighs, or pauses, or the way we rub our eyes at the end of a long day. Yet even with all that, a part of us might still remember those simple cartoon moments. Not clearly. More like a feeling that drifts past, like a scent you recognize, even though you can't place it. Maybe some comfort doesn't need a spotlight. Maybe it lives in the background, quietly, like the fridge humming or the distant sound of cars outside. You don't listen for it, but you'd notice if it disappeared. And that's the kind of comfort SpongeBob offered. Indirect, gentle, reliable. We carry things without realizing it. Childhood afternoons, music that made us less lonely, the sound of laughter fading down a hallway. We don't tuck them away carefully. They just stay because they meant something, even if they never got a full explanation. Something about that stayed. And maybe that's the softer truth about memory. We don't always need to understand why something mattered. We just need to know that it did. Some feelings never take shape, but they still manage to hold us together on difficult days, like a hand on the shoulder, or a warm light in an empty room, or a cartoon sponge who smiled even when we didn't. Tonight, as the day winds down and your thoughts settle into quieter places, maybe give yourself permission to carry those memories without explanation. They don't need names to be real. They don't need clarity to be valuable. They just need a heart willing to hold them. If the characters could see us now, tired, older, a little worn out, they probably wouldn't ask why. They wouldn't expect explanations or perfect answers. SpongeBob might just smile, the kind that doesn't force a smile back, but naturally makes one rise to the surface. Patrick might offer a seat beside him. No questions, no expectations, just presence. Squidward might hand you headphones and say nothing at all, allowing music to speak in ways words sometimes can't. Sandy might look at you and say, "You've come far," even if you don't feel like you have. And Plankton, he might nod and say, "Keep going," not because everything is fine, but because hope still matters. But that wasn't the strange part yet. What felt more meaningful was how real that comfort can feel, even if it only exists in imagination. Sometimes, the heart doesn't need proof. It just needs permission to feel seen. And these characters, for all their flaws and quirks, always seem to accept each other without demanding perfection. Maybe that's why they still matter, because they remind us that company doesn't always have to come with advice. Something about that stayed. Imagining them beside us, even for a moment, softens the room. SpongeBob's presence would probably feel like morning sunlight, warm, unhurried, quietly encouraging. Patrick's would feel like grass beneath your back, as clouds float above, aimless but peaceful. Squidward's might feel like earphones in a crowded train, letting thoughts come and go without interruption. Sandy's might feel like a soft breeze from far away, reminding you that strength doesn't always roar. And Plankton's, surprisingly, might feel like determination, a reminder that persistence itself is proof of life. But it didn't end there. The comfort wouldn't come from what they said. It would come from what they didn't say. They wouldn't ask about your productivity, or your goals, or your progress. They wouldn't ask if you were okay. They would simply sit with you until you were ready to stand again. Sometimes, the best reassurance arrives without instructions, like the glow of a TV left on in the background during a late-night snack, or the steady hum of a fan as you lie awake, thinking about tomorrow. Some forms of comfort don't need clarity. They just need space. You might imagine them now, sitting in your room, breathing in time with you. SpongeBob's laugh, filling the silence. Patrick leaning back with his eyes half closed. Squidward adjusting his headphones, turning the volume just right. Sandy glancing at you with a nod of respect. Plankton pacing slowly, a little tired too, but still believing tomorrow is worth reaching. Something about that stayed. Maybe the point was never to ask what these characters could teach us, but to notice what they already gave us. Company. A soft reminder that you don't always have to feel strong to keep going. And validation doesn't need applause. It just needs a moment of quiet acceptance. Tonight, if the world feels heavy, imagine them staying a little longer. No speeches, no lessons, just company. Sometimes, that's all a person needs after a long day. Maybe the ocean of Bikini Bottom was never just a setting. Maybe it was a mirror, reflecting who we were, who we still are, and all the quiet spaces in between. The waves didn't speak in words, but they always seemed to understand. They rose and fell like hearts do. Not perfectly, not evenly, but honestly, and that was enough. Growing up doesn't mean letting go of childhood. It just means carrying it differently, softer, quieter, like a melody you don't need to replay to know it mattered. Some memories don't fade, they just shift shape, becoming feelings instead of pictures, comfort instead of clarity. As kids, we saw the ocean as adventure. As adults, maybe we see it as reflection, a place where thoughts move slowly enough to understand themselves, a place that doesn't ask for conclusions. It just lets everything exist. Waves of joy, waves of doubt, waves of hope, all coming and going without judgment. You might have felt something like that while lying awake late at night, when your mind wandered without direction, but somehow still found its way to tenderness. But it didn't end there. Maybe the ocean has always been waiting patiently, ready to be visited again, not with a plane ticket or a map, but with a moment, a breath, a pause. Sometimes going back doesn't require travel, only stillness, only permission. When SpongeBob ran across those fields, or worked long shifts, or kept smiling even when no one understood, maybe the ocean was always watching, not to warn him, not to guide him, just to remind him that he wasn't alone, that he never had to earn the right to rest. And maybe, even now, it's still out there, somewhere in memory, waves moving to their timeless rhythm, holding everything we once loved inside a gentle tide. Something about that stayed. The ocean doesn't judge how far you've come. It doesn't measure your choices or compare your chapters. It simply reflects what is, quietly, so your heart can see itself more clearly. Growing up didn't erase childhood. It just folded it into who we are now, like a page bookmarked without needing a reason. Tonight, as the world slows down and the air gets still, maybe the ocean is still waving in some familiar corner of the mind, still waiting for us to rest, still saying, without hurry, without noise, almost like a lullaby, "You made it this far. Rest now. Maybe we'll never find every lost episode, but maybe we don't need to. Some memories weren't meant to be proven, only remembered. If tonight felt calm, even just a little, then that's enough. Sleep well. Dream softly. Good night."